Good day, everyone. Paul Garvey, Poultry Sales Manager for CBS. As Canadian Biosystems has always excelled at bringing solutions to the farm gate for our customers, we've entered in a new area of production for ourselves, and we are introducing a line of performance liquids. As we looked at adding water products to our lineup, we felt it was very important to look for a speaker that could explain the importance of cleaning and sanitizing those water lines before you introduce a new product to that system. And therefore, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Susan Watkins. Dr. Watkins is an Emeritus Distinguished Professor who recently retired from the University of Arkansas. Dr. Watkins worked in extension for the University of Arkansas from 1986 after she completed her doctorate in poultry nutrition. Her primary focus was in live production, and gradually she became a world expert on evaluating and improving livestock drinking water quality. Dr. Watkins will share her experience and her knowledge with us here on water sanitation and water quality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that introduction. It is always a pleasure to share what I have learned throughout my years of experience when it comes to water. And it's certainly been the neglected nutrient for many, many years, but as we shift more production towards antibiotic-free, or I believe in Canada it's raised without antibiotics, RWA, then we're going to see more of a need to focus on water quality, because we've got to get everything right if we're going to be working without the tools of antibiotics. And certainly we can't start any presentation about water without establishing just how important it is in the production cycle. It is our most important nutrient. This is what they drink, they consume more of than any other nutrient. And we know through experience that if we compromise quality and quantity, we're going to increase risk for challenges. Today, we're going to focus on quality and what we can do to get it right, so that as we utilize products in the water system to enhance or improve our performance, we're not going to compromise that nutrient. So we know that water just promotes life. Here in the South, in my part of the world, we've been in a drought, and it's just been heart-wrenching to watch the pastures go dry and the gardens kind of dry up, even though we're coming into fall. And now all of a sudden we're getting 3 months worth of rain in 2 days, but okay. The bottom line is we need water. And unfortunately, our water supplies, they're like flies and rodents. They can harbor almost every pathogen challenge you can think of. And there are a short list of pathogens that we've isolated from poultry water supplies, either my lab or other labs we've worked with. Things like cholera, bordetella, Pseudomonas. Pseudomonas can be a significant challenge in poultry operations when it gets seeded into water systems. E. coli, Campylobacter, Klebsiella, avian influenza, Salmonella, Staph, Strep, and it just goes on and on and on. The things that people have brought to me and said, well, this is what we found in our water supply. What does it mean? And it says, well, it means that you've got a challenge there that you're going to have to work extra hard to get rid of. Too many times people tell me, well, we're using water from the city or a municipal source, so we don't have to worry about water sanitation. Or maybe an operation where they're using reverse osmosis, which does pretty much clean up the water. And when they tell me this, they say, well, we don't have to treat our water. I just want to remind people, there's no guarantee that water is pathogen free. The nature of poultry operations, it invites good recontamination. So you can start with good water, but it doesn't mean it stays good in poultry system. And there's just no guarantee water can remain pathogen free. And when we have dirty water systems, it means there's a biofilm, it means we've got the potential for microorganisms particularly pathogens, to thrive. And I want to touch a little bit more on something that I just said about, drinking water systems in poultry operations are easily recontaminated. Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. One, that water's slow moving. It's warm during brooding or certain times of the production period. We might have the barn warm enough that the water system's getting warm enough to where it's promoting microbial growth. Water lines have a lot of hiding places, pinch points in them to where things can attach and then start colonizing. Water often contains food organisms need. When we have iron, manganese, or sulfur naturally occurring in water systems, those are foods that a lot of pathogenic organisms require to survive and do well. Then we're gonna add food, vitamins, organic acids, those things. Those can not only can promote the health and well-being of birds, but sometimes they can promote the health and well-being of microorganisms. So if our system isn't really clean and we're adding these foods, we may be really creating a significant challenge. As you can see here in this slide, this was an operation that was using an organic acid. They didn't have a very good water sanitation program. And the Pseudomonas was thriving because there was also iron in the water. And now we were getting this jelly-like substance on the filters and in the water system that was creating a huge challenge. And just think about it. The respiratory tract, it's a warm, moist tube. Water systems are usually warm, moist tubes. So a lot of times we can just kind of have an interchange of respiratory challenges coming from the water system because that water system mimics that respiratory tract and can thus promote some of those organisms that challenge the respiratory system. So with this said, we've established that water systems and poultry operations can be vulnerable to challenges. So what does it take to have a successful water program? Well, starting out, we want to assess farms and production to identify the opportunities. I like to call them opportunities instead of challenges because if we're looking at it more as an opportunity to create a positive water system, then we're going to be more apt to follow through than calling it a challenge to where we may feel overwhelmed that we can fix it. We want to know the water. What's the microbial, pH, mineral content? I'm pleased that majority of the producers I've worked with in Canada have established, these parameters. They get their water tested on an annual or semi-annual basis, and so they know what's in their water. Then we want to assess, the source, the system strengths and weaknesses. We want to start from the source, whether it's a well or an open source, or open reservoir like a river or a lake. And we're going to start following that water system all the way right down to where the birds are drinking. And we're going to see what along the way creates opportunities for pathogens that we need to address. And then once we understand our water system and we know what our pH, our mineral contents are, then we're going to develop a program that complements the water. Too many times I see producers get convinced by product salesmen who are selling the latest and greatest water sanitation that they need to use their product. And it may or may not be the best fit. What they're doing may be all they need to do. So before we start investing additional money, additional resources into new water sanitation products, make sure that it's really what you need. Next, we're going to be consistent. We're going to try to stay on that water sanitation program, our water line cleaning program, as consistently as we can so that we don't allow challenges. We're going to monitor and verify what works. And then, most important of all, we're going to make water quality part of the team culture. From the person who's walking that barn every day, who's understanding, hey, is the medicator or the injector working or not, all the way up to the head person of the operation. Everyone's going to invest in water quality as an important aspect of the operation. So we're going to start with that thorough inspection. We're going to evaluate the source, pipes, holding tanks. We're going to collect and visually inspect water from multiple locations. Sometimes just simply looking at the water can tell us we're losing control of it. And fortunately, I hope, most of you viewers don't have this situation here, but if you do, you've got extra work to do to get it fixed. And we're also going to, on occasion, inspect the pipes. Here was an operation where they were struggling with water quantity. And when they started looking into the pipes, you can even put a pencil in this pipe. They'd allowed so much iron sediment biofilm to build up in there. We're going to verify what's being used. What are we currently, products are currently being used in the system, how consistently, how are they being injected? Do we have any type of storage? No, this is not something that usually occurs in Canada, big storage tanks, but if you have small storage tanks, any type of storage, medication tanks where you mix products, look at those, verify that you're not getting a slime in the bottom of them or something's going on in those tanks that could be contributing to problem. And then we're going to review farm health. We have challenges going on consistently in flocks for 7 days? Do we have a high incidence of mortality that we just can't consistently blame on the hatchery? Maybe there's something going on that we need to look at, or maybe we've got something going on later on in the flock that we have birds breaking down or health challenges that we might need to think about. Okay, we need to alter what we're doing in order to overcome these challenges that are occurring. How is water leave enter holding tanks? Again, I know in Canada it's not a big production aspect to have holding tanks, but any type of tank, we got to see if we're getting a sediment buildup in the bottom of those tanks that can be feeding a microbial population, and then that's getting slugged to the birds. So again, the water coming into the tank might be great, but conditions in the holding tank might be creating problems. So how's that water leaving the tank? Can we thoroughly clean those tanks? Are tanks made out of polyvinyl, or are they concrete? Concrete tanks certainly add an aspect to water quality that is a challenge. Filters, injection points. What's the management and location? These can also impact quality. How do we inject things into the water? I love this operation where they were actually having to inject things out in the barn, but they were trying their best to keep it as sanitary as possible, versus this operation, which actually had a dead mouse floating in the bucket of product. Well, that's certainly not going to promote good health. Are we keeping our filters clean and sanitary, or are we seeing a lot of challenges like this, magnesium, sulfur, or iron, or the slime? These types of things, once they're allowed to capture and build up on filters, then they create a breeding ground for microorganisms. So we're going to be inspecting these and just saying, all right, are we doing the best we can to keep it clean and sanitary, or are we allowing things to possibly grow here is the way we're handling it. Going to collect samples for microbial assessments. And I highly recommend a total bacteria test. It's inexpensive, and it's just a quick quality assurance test that we can do. And we're going to test at the source, and then we may test along the way in the system. If we have holding tanks or med tanks, we may test after those or after water treatment. But then at the end of the day, we're going to get out there where the birds are drinking, at the end of the lines in the poultry barns, and we're going to assess and see how much bacteria is being allowed to thrive out there in that system, irregardless of what the source looked like. Here we had a source that was okay, but the numbers are starting to creep up. So I would certainly be keeping an eye on this number of 26,000 colony forming units of bacteria per milliliter. Here, the source had some contamination to it, and that's not uncommon. And I know we're going to see a lot of challenges here in the South after all of these hurricanes, and we get flooding. Our wells are going to get contaminated. So I know I'm going to be hearing a lot about E. coli challenges in the next few months. But our source is contaminated. They weren't treating it. And now we're going to give those baby birds 2.3 million colony forming units of bacteria per milliliter. That's a lot to ask of that young bird to start out doing well. Here the source was good, but they weren't taking care of it. And again, just slugging those birds with a lot of bacteria. And I think this is why some operations see that runting culling up the first week in production, and then they just never overcome it because the birds have just been heavily contaminated by the water system. And then this is what I'm seeing more and more of. The water source is good. They're taking care of it. And when they pull that sample out on the water line, it comes back. There's no bacteria in it. So check the box. We've got a good water program going on, and let's move on to the next thing that we need to work on in our operation. When we start using alternative products, we got to make sure that they aren't creating challenges in our water quality, particularly if we haven't been taking care of our water quality. And this was an operation that was struggling with some gut health challenges, and they were throwing some things at the birds, and walked in the barn and you see droppings like this, you just immediately know something is not right. So just took a water sample out of the water line, and sure enough, we're seeing E. coli, salmonella staph, just a lot of this Klebsiella, just a lot of unpleasant organisms that were in the water system that were probably not helping those birds' guts or their bird health in any way. So at that point, we need to step back and say, reassess, get control of our water quality so that when we do use these products, we're getting a benefit from them and they're not creating challenges. Something even more helpful for problem solving or confirming if our water system is in good shape is doing a line swab. Because we can take that drip sample out of the water line, but if this is a day when the biofilm is secure and not releasing, we may not be able to detect from that drip sample that I showed in the previous slide what's really going on in that water system. So if we utilize a swab and go into this water system, particularly at the end of a water line, that's going to be our weakest point, these dead end spots. Get in there and swab the inside of that line, can give us a lot more information about the sanitation level of that system. And on this operation, when we first started working with the line swabbing, it was a farm that used gas chlorination, had a really good water sanitation, daily water sanitation program. But since they had a good daily water sanitation program, they felt like they didn't really need to clean their water lines between flocks. So they hadn't been. And the swabs told us, the drips told us that, hey, the daily water sanitation was managing anything that got into the water flow, but the swabs told us that there was a healthy level of biofilm in those water systems that needed to be cleaned out. And sure enough, when this operation started doing line cleaning, they actually improved their feed conversion, even though they were on a good daily water sanitation program. I recommend using a swab that's hydrated, that's big enough to fit easily into the water line without getting contaminated by touching the opening of the water line, versus a little dry culture swab. Because on this operation, when they were about to start an antibiotic-free flock of turkeys, and the farmer was working on the water line leaving his small holding tank, and he had cut into it. I said, well, while we're here, let's swab and see what's in there. So the vet took her swab, the culture swab, and swiped in the line, and then plated it here. And then I pulled out in a sterile manner the hydrated swab, sterile hydrated swab, wiped it in there, and then we shook it, and then we cultured a little bit of this solution that the swab was in and plated that across here. Well, that was at 5:30 in the evening. By 7:30 the next morning, there's so much Bordetella showing up on this, where I used the sponge swab, that the vet and I looked at each other and said, it's probably not going to be a good idea to have an antibiotic-free flock on that farm. Whereas her Q-tip swab didn't really capture that into that biofilm and give us that assessment that there's a lot of Bordetella lurking in this distribution line that's potentially going to end up in the flock. Many operations have started using drip swabs to kind of get a feel for what's going on farms. And you can see here we got drips that are okay, but the swabs are starting to tell us we got some higher levels. We actually have some mold in these operations. And we struggle to see much E. coli in water samples, but we can. So if we're only looking for E. coli, we might be missing a lot of good information that the total plate count can give us here. Here's a swab that this is, the red means I would be keeping an eye on this, but we're certainly in a better range here than this operation or this operation. And then in house sport, where they tested another product, they actually saw that they had improved the total bacteria, see a little bit of spike in yeast and mold, but they really had those numbers down. And anytime we can get these numbers down, we're winning the numbers game against pathogens. We're not giving it a place to thrive in a water system. Whereas when the numbers start getting really high, really high as in this one, we're going to see a potential for E. coli pathogens to be incorporating into that biofilm and then release on its schedule, thus causing problems to the birds. So control the biofilm. That's kind of the bottom line here. If we know that if we don't keep the system clean or get it clean, then we're going to have a challenge. And we also know that we've got to keep it clean because clean pipes can rebuild biofilm in 3 to 5 days. So systems need line cleaning and daily water sanitation. And we have been able to prove that if you introduce E. coli into water and there's a biofilm, it will incorporate into the biofilm. They've actually been able to prove that laryngotracheitis, LT vaccine, can incorporate into the biofilm and remain viable for up to 3 weeks later. So that is certainly a good reason to have a good, clean water system. So kind of take home message when it comes to controlling biofilm, problems can get introduced. Consistent water reduces the risk opportunistic pathogens create. And I always love to show this picture of this water regulator. Here's the slime. And there in that slime was the challenge, the Bordetella challenge that was haunting the performance on this operation. So even good daily water sanitation programs don't necessarily take care of this biofilm because it can build a wall, and we got to do that daily water system cleaning. And the essentials to cleaning between flocks includes the right amount concentration of an effective cleaner left the proper amount of time. That is the key to success. So if we don't have the right cleaner concentration, we're not leaving it long enough, those are both failures in the process. We got to clean the whole system. That's an essential step. The water lines, the standpipes, the regulators, and when we can, the distribution pipes coming from the source going to the barns. As much of the system needs to be cleaned as possible. There are lots of great products out there. Document which one works best for your operation. We're going to talk a little bit more just to give you a feel for types of products that do and don't work in just a second. But key thing is document what works, collect swabs pre and post cleaning. So if I'm going to line clean and I'm trying to figure out, did I do it right? Did I pick a good product? I'm going to swab, say, lines 1 and 5 pre to see what the level of biofilm is in the system. Then I'm going to go through my procedure, flush out the strong cleaner, and then I'm going to swab after line cleaning lines, say 4 and 6. I'm going to swab after cleaning with different lines because we've already kind of wiped out those pre-swab lines and we've removed that biofilm physically. So now we need to look at some different lines. And I'm going to try to do at least 2 lines pre and post. That's going to give me a little bit better information. Last thing I'm going to do when I'm line cleaning is I'm going to flush the system post-line cleaning with sanitizer the birds can drink. And that's going to help kill any bugs that survive the line cleaning. So this is kind of the procedure in a nutshell, and now I'm going to kind of delve into it just a little bit more to help you understand why I think this procedure is so important. So first, thorough cleaning is essential, but if harsh cleaners can damage equipment, what are our best choices? I had a dear friend Alfred, who had a lot of respiratory challenges on his 8-house poultry farm. And so he decided, I'm going to fix this. And he just pumped in some really strong bleach, or actually just poured bleach into his tanks and pumped it in. And Alfred spent a lot of time changing out his regulator seals. It just tore it up. So, okay, we've tried to do that, and now we've damaged our equipment. So how do we walk the fine line between cleaning the system and not damaging the equipment? Well, one day I was out scrubbing the cow trough because it just consistently had this algae down in it that I could not make go away. I said, you know what? This algae kind of mimics that biofilm in water systems. It's really tough and it's hardy and it resists being killed, if you will. So we made up some little jars of this algae water, and I tested some different products. So in the control algae water, I didn't do anything to it. I just let it sit for 24 hours. And you can see by not doing anything, it doesn't just go away. The bacteria that was living in this algae water didn't go away. Made a bleach solution, 3%. And that's way stronger than what Alfred used that tore up the regulators. But you can see, even leaving it 4 and 24 hours, when we've got a lot of organic material present, it didn't necessarily kill everything. So now that tells us, you know what? Bleach is not the best choice for line cleaning. Citric acid. So many people tell me, oh, I'm cleaning my system out with citric acid. Well, you might be descaling some of the minerals, but you are not removing the slime, as this slide shows. It never missed a beat when it was exposed to the citric acid. Peracetic acid products used at a 2% rate can be some of our best products to use. And we typically leave them in the system 4 to 6 hours. There is some concern that lowering the acetic content may damage the system. I have not seen of that, but because that's a concern, we just recommend to leave it 4 to 6 hours. And here we were able to reduce it probably the most significant amount, by a 4-log reduction here, from almost 8 million down to 100 colony forming units per mil. And then when it did get left 24 hours, there was nothing detectable. A 50% stabilized hydrogen peroxide used at a 1% rate, and this would be about like dropping the medicator hose straight into this 50% concentrate. Left 4 hours, just not quite and not strong enough to completely eliminate the bacteria in this water. And then even leaving it 24 hours, still something there. We really had to go to that 3% rate and leaving it at least 24 hours in order to get a complete kill in our benchtop test. So that tells me right there, we better, if we're going to use these products, these hydrogen peroxide products, we got to make sure we're putting the right rate into the line and we're leaving it long enough to finish the job. So doing that 3% solution does require a special pump if you don't have a Stenner pump where you can dial up the rate, or a pump that will dial up the rate. So things like the Quick Blend 3% pump, it'll pull a vacuum up to 4 times stronger than other pumps, and it's got a 3% pre-installed tip right here, so that when a gallon of water passes through the pump, it's pulling 4 ounces of product into the water, hence creating a 3% solution. So when we line clean, after the birds are gone, we're going to flush the lines. Power flush is best, but any flush is good. I'm going to show a slide in a minute where it can be helpful, particularly if the water's been sitting dormant. And that's just going to help remove sediment, kind of hopefully loosen that bacteria. We're going to make sure the standpipes are working. And then we're going to, if we don't have one of these special pumps, then we can mix up in a trash can or a container or 100-gallon stock tank, 3 gallons of product like ProxyClean, Hydroline, Oxyblast, Siloxicide, any of those products will work. We're going to add 1 gallon to every 30 gallons of water. 1 gallon of product, 30 gallons of water. That's going to be a 3% solution. I recommend adding a vaccine dye. That way you know it's completely charged into the lines, and you know when it's completely out of the lines, because we've found over the years that lines just drain differently when we're in flush mode. So what may take a line 9 minutes to flush out might take another line 15 minutes. Just depends on where that line is and how the plumbing getting to that line is situated. Going to fill those lines, and at this point we're going to activate the drinkers to get that product down in the drinker, and then we're going to leave these solutions 24 to 72 hours. It's perfectly okay to leave them up to 72 hours. Again, we're going to clean that regulator. We're going to put it in bypass flush mode in order to get the line filled, but then we're going to make sure we take it out of bypass so that it gets into that regulator, because again, showed earlier, we can see some challenges that are associated with these regulator bladders. And so we don't, even now after a poor line cleaning, we know better. We can leave this stuff behind. So we got to make sure that we do that line cleaning right, get that cleaned out. And again, we want to activate that drinker, because when that drinker is not in drinking mode, we can get a little bacteria crust here, and we want to make sure that we activate it so that we get that, so that we cleanse this little area here, and we don't allow a little bacterial crust to form that's just sitting there waiting to be hydrated by the next flock. And then we're going to add a dye to the water line cleaning products to assure, again, it's in the system or it's completely removed. You pick. It can either be in the water that flushes in after the line cleaning, or it can be in the line cleaning water. But this way we have a visual way of knowing it's all in or it's all out. And that's very, very important. Again, once we have done the line cleaning, left it 24, 72 hours, we're going to flush that concentrated product out, but we're going to make sure that there's a sanitizer in the water coming in behind the flush water that's at a safe level for the birds to drink. Because what we found over the years is that even great products, these 50%, 3% solutions, when we've got a lot of challenge going on in a water system, even these great products left 48 hours, they're disrupting the biofilm, they're breaking it down. Something has a potential to be left behind. And if we just flush in plain water with no sanitizer in it, and then that water system goes dormant, waiting for that next flock, this level of organisms that we've released now are going to be scrambling to rebuild, and they can potentially cause problems for us. So if we've got that sanitizer level that the birds can drink, it's going to handle this stuff that's gotten released from the biofilm and keep that water protected until that flock is present. And again, flush the water lines. I encourage people to take time to flush water lines. I know that for babies, flushing really increases that pressure, but you can kind of push the birds onto the lines and they can kind of get it settled back down so that the pressure isn't too much on that water line. But here we can see, these were some lines that were sitting. It was a city water supply. So good water supply, but these lines have been sitting dormant and there was a lot of bacteria in there. And just by flushing it, we were able to actually pick up some of the chlorine residual from the city line and really reduce the levels. So in this situation, we used different aspects, but we found that just flushing it with plain old water was just as effective as using some of the products in it. So with that, we'll take a break, and that will end our session 1, establishing the need for good clean water and cleaning water lines. And we will begin in a moment with our water sanitation section.